The sky above Sci-Fi was a swirling mix of deep purples and electric blues, its twin moons casting an eerie glow over the endless jungle. Towering trees with glowing red leaves stretched toward the sky, their roots pulsing like veins beneath the soft, dark soil. The air hummed with an energy that was both alive and watchful. Captain Jack Mercer stepped out of his ship, adjusting the strap on his rifle. He had been on many missions before, but something about this place felt different. The reports said no human had ever set foot here. The planet belonged to them, the Typhorans, and their ruler was Queen Seraphis. Jack wasn't afraid. He had fought in wars, survived ambushes, and stared death in the face more times than he could count. But right now, he felt something he never expected. Unease. The jungle was too quiet. No animals, no wind, just an unnatural silence that pressed down on him like an invisible weight. His mission was simple: retrieve a lost artifact buried deep within the Queen's sacred land and get out before anyone knew he was here. But then, she appeared. From the shadows of the towering trees, a figure emerged. Queen Seraphis. She was nothing like Jack had imagined. Her skin shimmered like molten silver, reflecting the glow of the jungle. Her long, razor-sharp wings folded behind her, their edges humming with energy. Her piercing, glowing violet eyes locked onto him, as if peering straight into his soul. Jack instinctively raised his weapon. "That won't help you," the Queen said, her voice smooth yet laced with power. It echoed, as if spoken by 100 unseen voices. Jack's grip tightened around his gun. "Stay back." Seraphis didn't move. Instead, she tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle waiting to be solved. "You are bold," she said. "Foolish, but bold." Jack exhaled sharply. "I didn't come here for trouble. I just want what I came for." The Queen's lips curled into something between a smirk and a warning. "And what is it you think you came for?" Jack hesitated. The reports had warned him, never reveal too much to an alien monarch. "That's my business." Seraphis took a slow step forward, and the ground beneath her shivered. "Everything on this world is my business, human." Jack squared his shoulders. "Then I guess we have a problem." For the first time, the Queen's expression darkened. The air around her shimmered, charged with unseen energy. The jungle seemed to lean closer, as if listening to her every breath. Her voice turned cold. "Touch me, human, and you will regret it." Jack felt a chill crawl up his spine, but he didn't back down. "I don't believe in alien curses." Seraphis sighed, almost disappointed. "Then you are truly ignorant." Jack smirked. "Ignorant or not, I don't take orders from aliens." And then he did it. With a reckless smirk, he reached out and touched her arm. The moment his fingertips brushed her cold, metallic skin, everything changed. A violent shockwave exploded from her body, throwing Jack backward. He crashed into a tree, his vision blurring as a sharp, white-hot pain seared through his veins. His heart pounded like a war drum. He gasped for breath, his body convulsing as if struck by a force beyond human understanding. Seraphis stood over him, untouched, unbothered. She watched him struggle, a hint of amusement in her glowing eyes. "I warned you," she said softly. Jack's vision flickered. His head spun, his limbs burned. He felt like his body was being torn apart from the inside. He tried to scream, but no sound came. Darkness rushed in. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the Queen's cold, knowing smile. "You had your chance to walk away." Jack's body felt like it was being ripped apart, yet he was still alive. His heart pounded like a drum of war, his veins burning as if liquid fire surged through them. He had felt pain before, broken ribs, gunshot wounds, deep knife cuts. But this was something else. It wasn't just pain. It was transformation. His breath came in ragged gasps as he forced his eyes open. Where was he? The jungle was gone. The towering red-leaved trees, the eerie silence, the bioluminescent sky. Everything had disappeared. Instead, he found himself in a vast silver chamber, its walls pulsing with a soft blue light. Strange, twisting symbols shimmered across the surfaces, shifting like liquid metal. Jack tried to move, but his body refused to obey. His muscles felt like they were bound by invisible chains, his limbs leaden. He was lying on a raised platform, a glowing ring of energy encircling him. Then he saw her. Queen Seraphis stood at the edge of the platform, her violet eyes locked onto him, unreadable, calm, unshaken, as if she had seen this happen before. Jack clenched his teeth. "What did you do to me?" The queen tilted her head, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "I gave you a gift." Jack's fingers twitched. Gift. Every inch of his body was screaming in agony, and she called it a gift. He growled, "Undo it." Seraphis chuckled softly. "You still do not understand." She stepped closer, the silver floor shifting beneath her weight like liquid, responding to her presence. Jack forced himself to sit up, his head spinning. His vision blurred and sharpened at the same time, like two realities fighting for dominance. Then he noticed something wrong. His hands. They were glowing. A soft, silver hue pulsed beneath his skin, moving through his veins like threads of living energy. His pulse thrummed with something alien, powerful. His heart skipped. This wasn't normal. "What the hell did you do?" His voice was hoarse, laced with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Seraphis finally stopped smirking. Her expression turned serious. "You humans think you are untouchable, that the universe is yours to conquer, that you can take whatever you want and walk away unchanged." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp. "But this time, the universe took something from you." Jack swallowed hard. His instincts screamed at him to fight, to push back, to resist. But his body, his very being, was already changing. He could feel it. A new awareness prickled at the edges of his mind. He could sense the room around him, not just see it, but feel the hum of its energy, the invisible waves of motion rippling through the air. The queen's presence burned the brightest, like a star standing before him. Jack's fists clenched. "You think you've won." His voice was low, dangerous. Seraphis studied him, then shook her head. "I never intended to win. I only intended to teach." Jack swung his legs over the platform, forcing himself to stand. His balance wavered, his blood humming with an energy he couldn't control. He was stronger. He could feel it. Faster, sharper, but at what cost? His eyes locked onto the queen's. "What am I now?" Seraphis smiled. "Something more." Jack took a slow breath, his mind racing. He had come here for a mission, but now he was part of something much bigger, something unknown. And he wasn't sure if he would ever be human again. Jack's breath was slow, measured, but his heart pounded like war drums in his chest. The energy coursing through his body wasn't fading, it was growing, expanding, changing him. The silver chamber around him seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as his heart, the alien symbols shifting like liquid, responding to him. His fingers twitched, and the faint glow beneath his skin flickered. This wasn't right. This wasn't human. Seraphis stood motionless a few feet away, watching him with an unreadable expression. She was calm, patient, as if she had all the time in the universe. But Jack didn't. He clenched his fists, his fingers pressing into his palm harder than before. Too hard. The skin on his knuckles cracked. Jack inhaled sharply. There was no blood, no pain, just a shimmer of silver light where his flesh had broken. He stumbled back, his body humming with power he couldn't control. His voice was a rough whisper. "What did you do to me?" Seraphis stepped forward, and the very air around her seemed to bend in response. "You were warned." Jack's fists clenched harder. "This isn't a warning. This is a violation." Seraphis tilted her head slightly. "A violation." Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it. "Tell me, human, How many worlds have you taken? How many species have you bent to your will? You invade, you conquer, you strip planets of their life and resources, and when something pushes back, you call it a violation. Jack's jaw tightened. He had heard these kinds of speeches before. He had fought in wars, seen atrocities committed under the banners of progress and survival. But this wasn't justice. This was something else. Seraphis continued, stepping even closer. I did not take your life, Jack. I did not destroy your mind or strip you of your identity. I gave you a gift. I made you. More. Jack exhaled sharply. The glow beneath his skin pulsed again, sending a strange, warm sensation through his body. He could feel everything. The energy in the room, the hum of the ship's core deep beneath them, the faint, distant heartbeat of something massive outside the chamber. His senses were expanding. He looked down at his hands again. The glow was brighter. It wasn't just under his skin anymore. It was spreading outward, forming thin lines of energy that danced along his veins like living electricity. Jack's breathing quickened. Undo this. Seraphis shook her head. That is no longer possible. A surge of rage flared through him, but it was different now. It wasn't just emotion. It was power. The air around him trembled as if responding to his anger, the symbols on the walls flickering wildly. Seraphis observed him carefully. You feel it, don't you? The universe, speaking to you. Jack's head snapped up. He shouldn't have understood what she meant, but he did. The hum of energy, the shifting patterns in the air, the unseen currents moving through the fabric of reality itself. And the most terrifying part, it felt natural. Jack's hands curled into fists, and this time, the air around them shimmered. The glow intensified, swirling up his forearms like living fire. He could feel it waiting beneath his skin, coiling like a predator ready to strike. He took a step forward. If you won't undo this, then tell me, what am I now? Seraphis studied him for a moment before answering. You are the first of your kind. Jack's pulse spiked. The first of what? Seraphis continued, her voice steady. Your species is young, reckless. You burn through the stars without understanding what lies beyond them. But now you are something new, something evolved. Jack shook his head. I never asked for this. Seraphis gave a small, knowing smile. And yet, here you stand. Jack's breath came faster, his mind racing. The glow under his skin wasn't just a side effect. It was a transformation, and he wasn't sure if he was still human. His hands flexed, and the air around him shook. He could feel it now. He didn't just have power, he could control it. But the question was, what was he going to do with it? Jack could feel his body vibrating, the energy inside him pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Every nerve in his body was alive with something new, something powerful. The chamber around him was no longer just a metallic room. He could sense the ship itself, the vast network of energy flowing through its veins like a living organism. He was connected to it. He exhaled slowly, testing the sensation. As he focused, the glow beneath his skin pulsed in response. He willed it to stop, and it did. He released his control, and the energy flared back to life. This wasn't just some alien infection. This was a gift, or a curse. Seraphis stood a few steps away, watching him with that same unreadable expression. Jack didn't know whether she was studying him or waiting for something to happen. But he wasn't going to wait for her to make the next move. His voice was steady. What did you do to me? Seraphis tilted her head slightly. I've already told you. Jack clenched his fists, and the glow intensified. You changed me, but why? The queen finally took a step closer. The air around her shimmered, bending slightly as if reality itself was reacting to her presence. Because your kind has reached a crossroads. You are either the greatest force of creation, or the greatest force of destruction, and you do not yet understand which one you are. Jack felt his pulse quicken. This is a test, he realized. Seraphis smiled, just a little. It is the test. Jack's eyes narrowed. And what happens if I fail? The Queen's expression didn't change. Then your species will never leave the cradle of their homeworld. Jack took a slow breath. You're saying humans will be wiped out? Seraphis shook her head. Not wiped out. Left alone. Forgotten. Jack's chest tightened. This wasn't just about him. This was about humanity. And suddenly, he realized just how high the stakes had become. Jack flexed his fingers again, feeling the energy hum beneath his skin. He had power now. But what did that mean? What was he supposed to do with it? Seraphis took another step forward, her golden eyes gleaming. You have two choices, Jack. His breath caught. You can reject what you have become, she said softly, and I will remove the power from you. You will return to what you were before. Jack's jaw clenched. And the other choice. The Queen's gaze darkened. You embrace what you are. You step forward into the unknown. You become something more. Jack's heart pounded. He could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. This wasn't just about power. This was about evolution. He had spent his life fighting, surviving, pushing forward no matter what. And now, for the first time, he wasn't sure what the right choice was. Could he trust her? Could he trust himself? Jack glanced down at his hands. The glow was still there, still flickering like a fire waiting to be unleashed. He looked back up at Seraphis. I need to know the truth, he said, his voice steady. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly. About what? Jack took a step toward her. About what I am now. About what I can do. And about what you're not telling me. Seraphis studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, she nodded. Then follow me. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the far end of the chamber. A door slid open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. Jack hesitated for only a second. Then, with one final glance at his glowing hands, he stepped forward and into the unknown. Jack followed Seraphis down the corridor, his every step echoing in the eerie silence. The ship felt alive, humming softly beneath his feet, its walls pulsing faintly with an energy he could feel inside him. He wasn't the same man who had boarded this alien vessel. He wasn't even sure he was human anymore. Seraphis moved with graceful precision, her golden eyes forward, unreadable. She hadn't spoken since she told him to follow her, and that silence felt heavier than words ever could. Jack broke it. Where are we going? Seraphis didn't stop. To show you the truth. Jack exhaled, his hands tightening at his sides. He had heard those words before, from warlords and liars, from people who thought their truth was the only truth. But something in her voice, it wasn't arrogance, it was certainty. The corridor ended in a massive chamber, and the moment Jack stepped inside, his breath caught in his throat. He was standing at the edge of something impossible. The walls of the chamber were transparent, revealing a view of deep space, unlike anything he had ever seen. Stars burned in the distance, swirling in clusters, but it wasn't the beauty of the cosmos that made his heart pound. It was the ruins. Floating in the void were remnants of shattered worlds, massive planetary fragments, crumbling space stations, entire civilizations reduced to nothing but debris. The wreckage stretched endlessly, a cosmic graveyard that defied comprehension. Jack took a slow step forward. What is this? Seraphis finally turned to face him. A warning. Jack's gaze didn't leave the destruction outside. A warning about what? Seraphis lifted a hand, gesturing toward the ruins. Every species that has stood where you are now, every civilization that touched the power you now hold, chose wrong. Jack swallowed hard, his fingers unconsciously curling into fists. And what happened to them? Seraphis tilted her head slightly. What do you think? Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. The wreckage spoke for itself. His mind raced. If these were all civilizations that had reached this point of evolution, if they had failed, then what chance did humanity have? Jack turned to Seraphis. What exactly did they do wrong? The Queen's expression remained unreadable. They thought power was something to wield. They believed they could control it, shape it, use it to bend the universe to their will. Jack frowned. And you're saying that's not what power is for? Seraphis stepped closer, her golden eyes locking onto his. Power is not something you hold, Jack. It is something that holds you. The moment you try to control it, you lose yourself to it. Jack exhaled slowly. So what am I supposed to do? Seraphis studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, she spoke. You must choose what kind of god you will become. Jack felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had expected a lesson, a test, maybe even a punishment. But this wasn't just a challenge. This was a burden. Jack took another step toward the transparent walls, staring out at the ruins once more. If what she said was true, then the fate of humanity wasn't just about whether they survived. It was about whether they deserved to. He turned back to Seraphis, his voice quieter this time. And if I refuse? Seraphis didn't blink. Then humanity remains in the dark. You return to your world, untouched by what you've seen here. But someone else, one day, will take your place. And if they choose wrong. She let the words hang in the air. Jack closed his eyes for a moment. He thought of Earth, the cities, the people, the chaos and the beauty of it all. He thought of war and greed, of love and hope. Were they ready for this? Was he? Slowly, Jack opened his eyes. He looked down at his hands. The glow was still there, soft but undeniable. He had changed, and there was no going back. Jack met Seraphis's gaze. Tell me what I need to do. The Queen studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not a smirk, not a look of triumph. Something else, something like approval. She turned toward the far end of the chamber, where a new passageway had opened. Then come, she said. It's time to meet your first challenger. Jack's pulse quickened. The test wasn't over. It was just beginning. Jack's breath was steady, but his heart pounded like a war drum. The battle had been fierce, his body aching from the brutal clash. But he had won. The fallen ascendant lay motionless at his feet, its glowing veins dimming. The chamber around him was eerily silent, the shifting metallic walls no longer pulsing with energy. Seraphis stepped forward, her violet eyes narrowing as she studied Jack. You did well, she said, her voice measured. But this is not the end. Jack exhaled, shaking out his hands. Of course, it's not. Seraphis gestured, and the walls behind her split open. A corridor extended into the darkness beyond, lined with jagged structures that pulsed with an unsettling crimson glow. Jack could feel the energy radiating from it, malice woven into the very air. This is your final test, Seraphis said. Beyond this passage lies the core of ascension, but before you reach it, you must face the greatest truth of all. Jack wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. And what's that? Seraphis locked eyes with him. That power always demands a price. Jack clenched his fists. He was tired of cryptic warnings, of half-truths and hidden agendas. He had come this far, fought enemies stronger and faster than him. If there was a final battle waiting, then so be it. He stepped into the corridor. Immediately, a wave of dizziness struck him. His vision blurred, and the walls around him twisted. It felt like the very fabric of space was collapsing. He staggered, gripping the cold metallic ground beneath him. His veins burned, his muscles locking up. Then the world shattered. Jack was no longer in the Ascendant Chamber. He stood in the middle of a war-torn battlefield. Flaming wreckage stretched across a ruined landscape, the sky thick with smoke and blood-red clouds. Shattered buildings loomed in the distance, their broken frames casting long, jagged shadows. The air was filled with the distant echoes of screams, the scent of ash and metal thick in his lungs. And then he saw them. Rows upon rows of bodies. Not just any bodies. Humans. Jack's chest tightened. They lay strewn across the ground. Soldiers, civilians, young and old alike. Their eyes were open, lifeless, their bodies covered in deep gashes that glowed with the same energy that coursed through his veins. He stepped forward, his breathing shallow. His boots crunched against the rubble. "This isn't real. It couldn't be." A voice echoed from the shadows. "Do you see it now?" Jack froze. The voice was familiar, too familiar. From the smoke, a figure emerged. Himself. An exact replica. The same sharp blue eyes, the same battle-worn expression. But there was something wrong. The duplicate's veins burned brighter, his stance heavier. Jack tensed. What kind of trick is this? The other Jack smiled. No trick, just the truth. Jack took a cautious step forward. What truth? The duplicate gestured toward the bodies. This is what happens if you win. Jack's stomach twisted. You're lying. The other Jack's smile didn't waver. A god does not rise without sacrifice. He took a slow step closer. You think power is just given, that you can take it without consequence. His voice grew sharper. Look around you. Every great ruler, every great warrior, every so-called hero stands atop a mountain of the dead. Jack shook his head. No, I fight to protect people. The other Jack chuckled darkly. That's what they all say. At first. He pointed at the bodies. You didn't protect them. Jack's jaw tightened. This is a lie. It's a mind game. The duplicate tilted his head. Then prove it. Without warning, the other Jack lunged. Jack barely dodged as a fist crackling with energy streaked past his face. He retaliated, striking hard, but his double caught the punch with ease. The battle erupted. They moved like shadows, mirroring each other's movements, strikes clashing with terrifying force. Every attack Jack launched, his opponent countered. Every move he made, the other Jack had already anticipated. Because they were the same. And that's when Jack understood. This wasn't an enemy. This was what he could become. The moment the realization hit, the battlefield shifted. The duplicate stopped mid-strike. The fires flickered and died. The bodies faded into dust. Jack stood alone in an endless void. And before him, the queen appeared. Seraphis watched him, her expression unreadable. You have seen the truth, she murmured. Jack swallowed hard. That wasn't real. Wasn't it? She asked. Power corrupts, Jack. You decide what kind of ruler you become. Jack clenched his fists. He knew now. The final battle wasn't with an enemy. It was with himself. And the war had just begun.